Chamber of Commerce, and on behalf of our team, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Returning Employees to Work After COVID-19. This webinar is the 10th webinar that we've held in a series of COVID-19 programming, which we're working to bring to our membership. We've had various topics that have ranged from the CARES Act to the Paycheck Protection Program and health and wellness as we work in a remote environment. This webinar series is a collaboration between our regional chambers of commerce, NEPA Alliance, and Lesson Alive. Our participating chambers include the Wilkes-Barre Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Pittston, Greater Carbondale, Greater Hazleton, the Chamber of the Northern Poconos, Back Mountain Chamber, Wyoming County, Pike County, and Schuylkill Chamber of Commerce. This webinar is being recorded and it will be posted at the end of the day to the Chamber's resource page at www.scrantonchamber.com/important resources. And the question and answer feature will be enabled following the formal presentation. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about our presenter, Joe Soleo. Joe is with McNeese, Wallace & Nurick. Joe is an experienced practitioner in labor and employment law. He has extensively represented both private and public employers in labor and employment matters since his admission to the Pennsylvania Bar in 1993. Joe regularly counsels and provides day-to-day advice and training to employers in all industries with respect to employment-related issues. Joe encourages and helps employers to maintain a proactive and a preventative approach to employment law compliance due to potential liabilities and avoid costly employment-related claims and litigation. It is now my pleasure to introduce Joe Soleo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be joining you today to continue discussion of guidance regarding COVID-19 issues in today's workplace. We're all obviously in the midst of some difficult times, both personally and business-wise. And it's good that, businesses do some well-thought-out planning in these times, particularly as either the businesses that have been permitted to operate continue, and for businesses that in the foreseeable future will be now opening up and having to deal with a lot of issues in returning employees to work. And that's what is going to be the focus of today's discussion. I just will point out that this is not necessarily a comprehensive discussion, because in terms of what employers and businesses will be faced with opening up in today's times, the types of issues and range of issues that you may be dealing with can vary considerably on a lot of different factors, including, for example, the industry you're in or your particular workforce or your location. So this is not kind of a one-size-fits-all type of guidance, but what we're going to talk about today should be a very good foundation for any business to be able to cover the issues that need to be addressed again as they start operating or continue operating in these times. So what we're going to talk about today is considerations for resuming operations and returning employees to work as state allows more businesses to reopen. We're going to talk about best practices, some legal requirements, things you need to do no matter what. And the real question is, are you prepared? Again, this is a very difficult time. You want to make sure you have your bases covered, because a lot of things that you're going to be dealing with are going to be new things in today's business environment, involving safety and health issues. Also, again, very new legal requirements that you want to make sure that you are addressing. And we're going to have questions, an opportunity for questions and answers today. Next slide, please. So one of the first issues I want to discuss is the importance of clear employee and workplace communications. Now, I think we can all recognize that that this is a good business practice at any time, of course. And but I think it's also easy to recognize that right now, clear communication for employees and in our workplace is more important than ever, particularly for an employer who has been suspended in operations for a period of time, and employees may have been laid off, and you're going to be calling employees back. I think some of the points to, and again, these communications will depend somewhat on your industry, your workforce, issues that may be particular to your operation and your employee complement. But some things I think that are going to be common to run through any business operation. I think you want to send, obviously, a welcoming message, convey positive and reassuring thoughts, although at the same time address important health and safety issues. We're operating in a time now where there are new things in our business world: social distancing, masks, time off policies, employees who feel sick or employees who feel unsafe into coming to work. These are kind of all new issues that employers did not have to deal with, presumably a couple months ago when things shut down. So employees are going to have an awful lot of questions. There's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and you want to make sure as an employer you're addressing those things and you are making employees feel comfortable as they're coming back to work. You want to provide clear notice of available work and expected return to work date, things like that. You may not be calling back your entire workforce at this time. You may be only calling back certain employees or certain groups of employees. Again, employees will have a lot of questions. And let's all be realistic. Right now, at least for now, it's not going to be at some point there's going to be a cutoff, but employees who are off right now and not working are getting some pretty good unemployment benefits and enhanced employment benefits. You're going to have different views among different employees. You're going to have some employees that, regardless of whether or not they were making more money in unemployment as opposed to coming back, some employees are going to be happy to be returning to work. They're going to be happy to returning to some form of normalcy. Other employees may be very resentful or have a lot of questions about, well, why should I go out there now when maybe it's not completely safe, and when I've had the ability up to this point to collect benefits that may be comparable to or higher than what I was collecting before. So those are some of the issues that you want to deal with. And again, clear notice is going to be helpful in addressing those issues. And these clear communications, again, not only should this be an exercise in good communications to have good relations with your employees and to maintain a satisfied workforce, but also to be protective of your business interests. For example, going back to those unemployment claims, if you're returning employees and some of them want to stay home, not return to work, then you'll have a decision to make as to whether or not you're going to be contesting those claims. If you are going to be contesting them, having a good record of their offer to return to work and the return to work date and things like that could be important with respect to unemployment claims. Also keep in mind, obviously, that right now in the region that we're in, there's not going to be an immediate return to work in terms of, kind of across the board. The governor is working with a phased-in approach. We are familiar now with the red, yellow, and the green zones. And right now, we fall within, kind of the northeast and the tier that is, and the southeast that is not doing particularly well in terms of the control of the spread of the virus, or where the numbers, at least according to the governor's plan, should be before things start reopening. So, this area is going to be a little bit more down the road in terms of a broader reopening, but preparing in advance is going to be important. And one of the hallmarks to, good employee communication, and in an uncertain time like this, when employees are going to have a lot of concerns and issues, and that will be new things that really are not typically things that would be addressed in the workplace. We want to maintain an open door policy, but with social distancing and proper rules in place. Employees will have a lot of questions. Be prepared to, promptly address questions and concerns. It's okay, of course, if you don't know all the answers, but be available to listen. And if you need time to do some research, to get some guidance, to get some counsel, you can do that. But the point is, you want to have an open ear and a good line of communication to your employees, particularly in this time of uncertainty. Next paragraph or slide, please. So let's just talk about kind of a technical legal requirement that is easy to meet, but it's something that this is one of the things that you want to kind of put on your checklist and get it done so that you don't have to worry about. There are two notice requirements in particular. We're all familiar with the notices that are typically posted in our workplace. And, those are federal and state law, employment law notices, regarding such thing as discrimination, anti-discrimination statutes, workers' comp, OSHA, those types of things. We all are familiar with the standard posters that we have up in our workplaces. Well, there are two new items that are directly related to COVID-19 that you want to make sure that you take care of, and they're easy to take care of. So the first one is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, the FFCRA. Now that has been in effect since April 1st. But again, this presentation is designed for businesses that are either allowed to continue to operate or ones that are going to be opening up as things move forward. Some of the employers that are going to be opening up as things move forward may not really have taken care of any of these types of issues or not had to deal with the benefits under the FFCRA because their employees may have been laid off and they wouldn't be entitled to these benefits. And posting the notice, although again, it should have been done as of April 1st, there's kind of a no harm, no foul situation if the employer was not actively operating. Well, now again, you should get prepared if you're a business, again, that is going to anticipate reopening in the future, that you have these notices posted. We have the links here for the FFCRA notice. It's just a simple one page that you can print out from the internet. The link is there. There's also a frequently asked questions guidance that is posted specifically about the notice. So an employer is to have employees or have this posted like you would a regular notice for the other employment laws. You should have it posted at your central work location in a place where employees will be able to see it. However, there's some flexibility built in because we may have employers that are using telework right now, employees that are working home, or you have other employees in an industry maybe who typically don't necessarily report to a central location. They may work remotely, like a construction worker or something like that. In this case, the notices can be transmitted in some reasonable means for the employee to get it and receive it. That could be by email. It could be by regular mail. You could post it on some type of an employer website and inform employees of where to get it. So all you need to do, again, is really just go and print out this one-page poster, get it posted or distributed to employees. And if you have any questions about who needs to get it or any other questions that come up about the posting, again, you can consult this questions and answers publication. Also, more recently, with the governor getting ready to start opening things up more broadly as time moves on in a phased-in fashion, you need to be mindful, and we're going to have slides on this toward the end of the presentation today. You need to be mindful, of course, of a number of state orders that have been issued regarding various things related to COVID-19 and employers and the workplace. Most recently, and we're going to talk about this again a little bit later on, the state has issued kind of an updated guidance that references all the individual pieces of guidance. And one of the requirements that has been put in place is that there must be a posting about the state orders that are in place. And again, you can get that at that link right there. There is, it's actually, it's a one-page posting, and that's the title of it, PA COVID-19 Safety Procedures for Businesses. And the subtitle is Protecting Customers and Employees Working in the Commonwealth. It's just a one-page document, although there is also a notice that goes with it. It's a certification of sorts, the second page, where the business certifies with a representative of the business that the notice is posted in its facility or is distributed, as we talked about with the FFCRA notice. And so somebody has to verify that. and actually one of the requirements is that each business must identify a pandemic safety officer. That's part of the state requirements for the orders that are out there. And also that's indicated in the certification for the notice when the employer signs that they're aware of this notice and that they're posting it. So I would certainly recommend, whether you're a business that's operating or whether you're a business that's going to be contemplating operating in the near future, that you go to that link right there, become aware of and print out that that notice and get that posted when it's the right time. Next slide, please. So one of the other things that you're going to want to do in terms of your planning and your operations going forward, you're going to want to look at establishing relevant policies and protocols. You know, right now there is quite a bit of moving parts. There are quite a bit of moving parts with respect to you know, how a business is operating. Things you need to do to protect your workforce, either that are recommended or that are required. Again, these requirements that are in place by state order. And there's a lot to keep track of. And you know, you're going to want to have policies and protocols in place so that you can address these things in real time, and to the extent possible, you can do it, you know, without, you're always going to potentially have to go and do some research or do some consulting or do some legwork, but you want to have a foundation of knowledge and have done the work in advance, so you know that you can answer most of the questions, and you already have things in place, so you're not starting from scratch. And you may have to, again, be working on addressing some nuances or some, you know, some things that don't necessarily fall within the normal range of some of these issues. But that's the space you want to be dealing in. You know, not dealing in the things that you could have and should have kind of covered and prepared for in advance. So here are some of the, you know, I'll say the principal things that really you should be thinking about. Again, there may be other things relative to your particular industry, region, or workforce, but these are the things that all employers should be looking at. Number one, personal hygiene practices, and with that, facilities and supplies. So we're going to talk a little bit later, and I'm going to, you know, ask you, if you're not familiar with them, to go and look at some of these state orders. These state orders talk about, if you're operating, if there are employees at your facility, what they need to be doing to protect themselves and to protect others. And one is that, you know, you as the employer need to have, you need to instruct your employees, you need to have the facilities available and the supplies available so that they can be doing proper hand washing, that they can, you know, that there can be proper cleanup if there's a potential exposure, that there can be a cleanup of what, you know, and this wraps into the second one a little bit, cleaning procedures, cleaning of high touch areas and things like that, so we can control the potential spread. So again, we're talking about, you know, you're going to be having a lot more hand washing going on. You know, do you have the right, you know, antiviral, antibacterial soap? You know, do you have enough towels or you know, paper towels, that type of thing. So those are the type of thing you want to look at and you want to prepare for in advance, and you don't want to be scrambling. We also know that some of these supplies are a little bit limited. So again, addressing this stuff in advance is very important. Cleaning procedures. We'll mention a little bit later on that some of the government orders right now in Pennsylvania specifically talk about what kind of cleaning procedures you need to have in place, and that obviously employers need to be taking those measures seriously. So another thing that you want to prepare for in advance, you want to make sure you have the personnel that can be involved in the planning. They know what they're doing. And there are some unique cleaning aspects right now with respect to the you know, COVID-19. Again, there's new kind of terminology that's worked its way into the business world now because of this issue. High touch areas, for example. So deep cleaning is another term now. So you know, you want to continue to maintain your regular cleaning, but we may need to do some extra and specialty cleaning in certain types of situations, either due to the traffic in that area, what's going on in that area, and if you have an exposure. So if we know we have a confirmed case at some point in the workplace, then there are certain protocols that will have to be initiated in that case. And one of those, for example, is again, you need to do some specialty or deep cleaning in that area. And one interesting thing, the recommendation is that if you have an exposure in the area, that area or those areas where that person may have been should be isolated to the extent possible. And actually, the area should be cordoned off and not cleaned if possible. Now, it's not always possible, but not clean it for 24 to 48 hours. Now, you might ask, well, why is that? Well, that's so even the cleaners can be protected, right? So that, the potential virus on surfaces, although they have a limited shelf life, there's still a possibility. And if possible, you want to let those areas cool down, if you will, before even cleaning them. And again, there's some flexibility built in there. That's if possible. There may be reasons why it's not possible. But those are the things, again, you should at least be aware of and be thinking about before you have to put some of these measures in place. Security and safety measures. Some of these state orders, again, even if you can open back up, they talk about limiting in-person contact from people on the outside, non-employees, limiting in-person meetings. What if you have, a vendor who is brave enough to come out and come and knock at the door? What these state orders are saying, you need to have someone in place and procedures in place to be able to deal with and field those things. Now, I'm not talking that you need to have armed guards around the perimeter, but again, depending on your size and depending on your type of workforce, you should at least have given this a thought. You designate certain people who are going to be responsible for certain things so that you can take some action if and when the time is right for that. Social distancing, obviously. Our muscle memory is not going to be built for this. A lot of people, I've been working from home for quite some time now. When there comes a time where I'm back in the workplace, my muscle memory is built to extend my hand and shake somebody's hand. My muscle memory is to go and collaborate with my assistant and walk out and maybe stand at her desk and be in close proximity. In my head, I know that things are different now, but we're going to need to have some repetition. We're going to need to have some people reminding us of things. It's going to be helpful to have notices in place and maybe some training with your employees, and again, maybe some written protocols, so that we can get used to this new world that we're living in, at least for the short term. So, yes, everybody knows we should be social distancing, but the point is you need to prepare, make sure we know what that looks like in your workplace and that we communicate to employees. I had a client ask me the other day, we have a hallway that is about 6 foot wide. So what does that mean? Can we only have, should we make that a one-way hallway? Two people can't walk down it at the same time. Well, there are probably different ways that you can address that issue. And the rules also provide, that social distancing should be maintained as much as practically possible. And, social distancing, the norms are also designed that people are not supposed to stay for any measurable period of time, with violating these rules. So, if you have a hallway that's 6 foot wide, you can put some courtesies in place that certainly if people can catch themselves, one person wait at the entrance to the hallway or the exit to the hallway until the other person passes. Literally, you can have it that one person courteously steps to their back to the wall, and leaves as much room, and the other person walks on the other side again, and they're not spending any dedicated time next to each other. It would be in passing, but reasonable kind of common sense things that could be put in place to kind of follow these rules and comply with these rules. So those are the types of things you want to be thinking about. Masks and other relevant PPE. Now, masks in Pennsylvania is a big issue. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in one of our other slides, but the point is you need to be prepared for this. The regulations in the state right now by the governor's order is that employees and visitors, although we're limiting visitors, so we're really focused on employees must wear masks in the workplace. Now, there are going to be some exceptions here and there, but for the most part, employees need to have masks. Now, do they have to have N95 masks? Of course not. In fact, it's discouraged because N95 masks and other, kind of medical masks and things like that should be reserved for the people who are on the front lines and taking care of healthcare. And the masks could be homemade, and employees can be given guidance on that. The employer has a responsibility to make sure that employees are going to be wearing masks. Again, you're going to want to address issues that come up. You're going to want to do your legwork to be prepared to address those issues that are going to come up. Employees with health conditions, safety issues, security issues in terms of wearing the masks. Temperature screenings. So here's another interesting issue. Now, many employers right now who are operating are using temporary screenings, and they're doing a variety of methods. Either they're doing it at their place, at some location, contact point before employees enter the building, and they are doing them. They're doing employer-initiated temperature screenings. Some employers are doing self-initiated employee screenings, where the employees must do them at home before they come in, and if they hit a certain temperature, they must report that to the employer. Now, many of you would know, in days before coronavirus, if an employer had called me and say, "Hey, Joe, we want to take the temperatures of our employees," I would fall off our chair and say, of course you can't do that. Well, in today's day of COVID-19, because the virus is so contagious and because it is so deadly, basically, there's a legal analysis that's involved with it, but because there's such a direct safety threat, employers can initiate these policies now. There's, there is more flexibility, and there's actually a good reason to do it. And the EEOC and the PHRC, organizations like that, have addressed that. Now, that doesn't mean that you can just, do it any way that you want it, that you want to, and that there are no rules. But the concept certainly is something that's recognized. The other question is when to implement the temperature screenings. And we're going to talk about this on another slide, but just to give you a little bit of a preview. Again, many employers are doing it voluntarily right now. It is not required by any law to do temperature screenings in any form. However, what the state law says is if you have an exposure in your workplace, then you must implement temperature screenings for all employees, and it must be done for at least a 14-day period, the incubation period of the virus, and the employer must do it and document it. So you'll see there's a shift right now, and before you have any exposure, an employer can voluntarily do it or not do it. If you have and if they do it now voluntarily, they can do it themselves, or the employees can be made to do it, self-initiate it, and report back to the employer. If there is an exposure in the workplace, the employer has to do it then for all their employees for at least a 14-day period, and there are certain rules of the road. For example, you have to do it outside of your facility, so you have to set up a location to do it outside when they come in. You have to maintain social distancing in connection with the taking of the temperature screenings, and there are other things like that. So that's just some of the rules of the road on that. Again, something you need to be prepared with because there's a little bit of detail to that. Exposure protocol, what happens if you have an exposure in your workplace? There are going to be things that you're going to need to initiate: cleaning, temperature screenings. What happens with the employee? How long does the employee have to be out? When can they return? Those types of things. Who else may have to quarantine who's been in contact with the employee? So those are the types of issues that you're going to be dealing with. Some pretty detailed things. You're going to want to be prepared for that. Next slide, please. So we talked about the notice before, the FFCRA notice, and now, employers who are continuing to operate have had to deal since April 1st with the FFCRA benefits. And we're not going to have a lengthy discussion on this today. We had a session on this last week, and there's other good guidance out there. Time wouldn't allow for this today, but basically there are two paid sick leave, paid leave benefits. One is emergency paid sick leave that could be up to 80 hours for a full-time employee and a prorated amount for a part-time employee for basically 5 enumerated reasons. For example, a reason would be if an employee has symptoms of COVID-19 and is seeking a medical diagnosis. While they're out for that time, they can qualify for paid leave. The employer has to pay it, but the employer can get a tax credit for this benefit that can even be funded upfront by tax withholdings that the employer would normally pay, but it can retain those tax withholdings to fund these benefits. There's also an Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act benefit. That's more a family leave benefit, not a medical leave benefit. That pertains to if an employee has to be home because a minor child is home due to school closure, which all schools are closed right now, or due to unavailability or closure of childcare. And this can last up to 12 total weeks, although it runs concurrently with the paid sick leave. And again, it's paid, although there are caps on the amount of the payment. So, for example, it's 2/3 of the employee's pay, but it's capped at $200 a day. So you need to be aware of these benefits, particularly if you're an employer who has not been operating or going to be contemplating operating in the future. You've not really been dealing with these potential issues, so you need to become aware of it, because if you do bring employees back, you are going to be getting these leave requests, and you're going to have to deal with them. And these provisions sunset. They're going to phase out as of December 31st, 2020, or prior to that, although I don't hold out much hope to this, prior to that, if the emergency declaration over the pandemic is declared over at some point. Next paragraph. So you're also going to want to be aware of other leave requests and reasonable accommodation issues. So be prepared to address, for example, FMLA leave requests. An example of that could be an employee who says they have a compromised immunity, or they have underlying health conditions that make them vulnerable to COVID-19. This is quite a bit of a gray area as to whether or not legally an employer would be required to give a leave in that circumstance. However, what the guidance has been that employees are recommended to have flexible leave policies, but they're in these times. But there has to be a balance there, right? I mean, we know that if you have to try to be consistent as an employer, and when you start drawing these lines, you have to be careful. A lot of employees may just simply, be, not to minimize this, but they may have a generalized fear or anxiety about returning to work in the context of COVID-19, and they don't feel comfortable coming into work. So how do you deal with that? And how do you sort through the employee who says, well, I don't feel comfortable coming back, I'm very fearful, to the employee who says that, but you have a sense that they just like to be home collecting the unemployment? And then let's throw something else in the mix. How about you have an employee who generally, has an anxiety about returning to work, or let me say a concern. And then you have an employee who says, well, I don't feel comfortable coming back to work, and I have had an underlying, panic disorder and an anxiety condition. And this fear is aggravating that. And I just don't feel I can function. I'm having flare-ups because of that, and I can't come into work for that reason. So you have these different kind of nuances. I kind of just outlined 3 different scenarios there of why employees may not want to return to work. The answers to those issues or how an employer may decide to handle them may differ in various respects. So the point is that you're going to need to be prepared to address these issues. You don't have to have immediate answers, but you should give them thought, and you're going to have to give thought at the time to how you're going to address and handle these issues. Company leave policies, review your company leave policies. What do you already have in place? And are you going to be considering modifying them? Some employers are doing that in various respects. So that again is something that you're going to want to look at. And ADA reasonable accommodation requests, a pretty straightforward is one way. An employee may request, "Can I work from home?" Again, maybe one of these employees who says they have a depressed immune system. Maybe you as an employer have the ability to have some employees work from home, but maybe you don't others. So again, those are issues that you're going to have to be given consideration to. So kind of a little bit of an offshoot of the last slide and talking about the ADA issues. You're going to have to watch for potential ADA issues, disability-related inquiries and medical exams. So we've talked about that a little bit already. You're going to have an employee who potentially says, "Well, I can't return to work because of an underlying condition that puts me in a vulnerable population for COVID-19. So, do you have a right to get a medical, a note on that, a doctor's note? Well, I think you absolutely do. Because, it does, an inquiry under the ADA has to be job related and consistent with medical necessity. And this would be in that case because you have an employee who is saying they can't come into work because of this particular reason. So we have a right to document and get support on that. You may have an employee who, says that they don't feel well or that they've been exposed to someone else outside of work. Can we exclude those employees from work for a period of time until there was some criteria in place that clears them to return to work? Well, the short answer is yes, but again, those are going to be individualized decisions depending on the circumstances. This falls into the category of a direct threat. If you have an employee who, we can't just guess at this. Again, this is looking at certain scenarios and making a determination that there's enough information there to support that this employee could be a direct threat in returning to the workforce. But those are the things that you have to do. You're going to have to do enough investigation and inquiry at the time to make those determinations. And there's the standard there for direct threat. Medical exams, again, even taking a temperature would be considered a medical exam that normally would be prohibited, but can be done now. And again, you have to make a decision right now. Do you want to do that as a matter of course, as a preventative measure, or do you need to, at the very least, be prepared to do it when and if there is an exposure? Next slide. Oh, and one other measure, privacy. We do have concerns about privacy. I mean, the general rule of thumb, if you have an employee who has had an exposure, who has had a potential contact and needs to be out of the workforce for a period of time, you're going to have to get in touch with other employees. You may have to do an inquiry of other employees who have been in close contact with that employee and who may have, the potential for a secondary exposure. So, and you're going to have questions, right? Joe Soleo was working at the desk or the office next to me, and he's not coming in for the next couple of days. You're going to get questions. So, the general rule of thumb is you're not going to be specifically identifying anybody by name. Now, is it possible that you may need to be talking to employees? Look, if you've been in Joe Soleo's office in the last, 5 days, or if you've been in the X office or this building in the last 5 days, we need to talk to you about some protocols that may need to be in place. Well, why? What's going on? Is Joe sick? So, we might not be able, people may be able to figure that out, but we're going to have to figure out a discreet way to address that issue. When you're going to use certain kind of tools that we're familiar with in HR, for example, that's protected information that I can't discuss. What we can discuss with you is we have to go through some protocols here, to make sure that we address some safety and health issues. So you just need to be careful about some of that. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Wait, did I miss? Oh, can you go back for 1 second? Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry. So please stay current with relevant guidance. There's a lot of guidance out there. There are some key places where you want to be looking. CDC, the DOL, and the OSHA are a couple of the main examples, and PA state guidance. We're going to address that in upcoming slides. There are a lot of different places that you can get this information. The links that we've given you here are really to kind of the main pages, and from those main pages, you may have to go to other pages. But these are going to give you some good head start. The guidance also changes and is updated from time to time, so you really should be checking back and paying attention to that. Next slide, please. I'm just going to briefly mention that watch for industry-specific guidance, particularly for like OSHA. If you're a healthcare provider, and you'll see here, if you're in the meat and poultry processing workers, if you're in the construction industry, manufacturing, package delivery, retail, all of these different industries have different guidance that may be specific to the industry. So if you are in an industry like that, or you want to check about your industry, that you want to make sure that you do that. OSHA also has, in addition to the page I provided on the last slide, which is kind of the general link to OSHA COVID-19 information, they have a good page here that's news and updates that kind of links to all their other stuff and keeps you current. So you should check that out. Next page. So I want to spend a little bit of time before we move to questions to talk about really what is probably the most important topic that employers need to be aware of if they're going to be opening up, or if they've been conducting and are going to continue conducting business in Pennsylvania in the context of COVID-19. And that is, Pennsylvania has issued, like many states, but Pennsylvania has issued very specific and detailed orders that will apply to the workplace. We know, these are all relevant to some extent. We have the stay-at-home order kind of is one aspect. We had the order directing the closure of all businesses that are not life-sustaining, and there's a list that goes with that of which businesses are or are not life-sustaining. Then from there, additional details started to come into effect with respect to kind of the nuts and bolts of what employers who were continuing to operate needed to do. So, for example, there's an order directing building safety measures that was issued some time ago. That was actually, I believe, in early April. That talks about, that's a relatively short order, but it talks about certain things about cleaning and stuff like that. Not in great detail, but in some detail. Then we had the order directing public health safety measures for businesses permitted to maintain in-person operations. We're going to talk about that on the next slide in more detail. That one is the most important, and you really should be familiar with it to a fair degree. We have links down there on the bottom where you can check out information on the state regulations that are placed. And if we go to the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about in more specific. So this one order, as I indicated, that's the most important in my opinion. That went into effect, I believe, as of April 16. It remains in place, and for right now, it was issued on April 16th, and I think it became enforceable as of April 19th. Now, some of the things that are covered by this are, as I mentioned before, certain specific cleaning measures. This is the order that requires that employees wear face masks while they're at the workplace, and that could be even outside and in vehicles in certain circumstances. Employees must have access to regular hand washing with soap, hand sanitizer, and disinfectant wipes. So again, those are things we need to supply and make sure we have the facilities for. Non-essential visitors are prohibited from entering the business. All employees are to be made aware of the required procedures. And remember, we mentioned about that poster, COVID-19 safety procedures for businesses in Pennsylvania, and we gave you the link to that. So that's part of this overall process. Now, this particular order, you have the link right there, and there's also a very helpful frequently asked questions guidance, and the link is there. So one thing of note that I want to make sure you understand. So we talked before about the temperature screening. So in this order, it talks about what needs to be in place for an employer that's operating under any circumstance. There is a certain subsection in this order that is pretty detailed, and it talks about protocols that must be established but don't need to be executed upon until there's a discovery that there's been an exposure in the business. So again, this is an important planning step that needs to be taken, and then you must be prepared at the time to implement these steps. That includes, as I had mentioned before, that there must be temperature screenings that would be initiated by the employer and administered by the employer for the 14-day period. So that's something you have to have at the ready, whether you're doing temperature screenings or not now voluntarily. This is something that becomes mandatory when there's a screening, when there's an exposure. And again, there's some changes that must go into effect, and that is that the screenings must be done by the employer. Now, does a nurse or doctor have to do the screenings? No. But it's got to be somebody that at least has enough knowledge. It can be somebody that you contract with, an outside person who may be a medical person. A lot of things that you're going to need to think about, obviously. Where is it going to be done? Who's going to do it? What are the rules going to be? How are we going to have people line up? Are people going to be paid for that time if there's any delay in them getting into the shop? What instruments are they going to use? Those types of things. So those are things that you need to look at and work out. Again, I would go and make sure you have this order printed out. Print out the frequently asked questions. For example, the frequently asked questions will talk about what happens if an employee has a health condition. Some employees cannot wear a respirator or a face mask because maybe they have a respiratory condition or some other condition. Basically, if somebody has a verifiable condition, they do not have to wear the mask. You may ask, well, isn't that counterproductive? I suppose, but I think the idea here is that you have the most coverage, no pun intended, the most coverage that you can. There may be some exceptions. The people who aren't wearing masks, maybe you take extra precautions with them with social distancing. Another question that's answered by the question and answers is that social distancing is not a substitute for wearing the mask. Now, CDC guidance may be a little bit different, but Pennsylvania has elected to take a very strict approach, meaning if I'm in an office building or a workplace and I'm 25 feet from another worker, do I have to wear the mask? And the answer, according to Pennsylvania, is yes. However, there are, again, a few other exceptions that are not health related. For example, if you are in a contained office by yourself and are not going to have anticipated visitors, you can take off the mask when you're in the office. Now, if a visitor comes in, both parties need to have it on. If you're in a car, if you're in a vehicle for work, the general rule is that you must wear the mask. However, if you're going to be in the car or vehicle without any passengers for the round trip, basically you can take the mask off and not have to wear the mask. So those are the types of things that are in play that you need to be aware of. Next slide, please. Temperature screenings, we talked about those before. We basically covered this. So you need to be aware of this. If you're going to do it voluntarily, make sure you have a good process and procedures in place. And remember that you may have to kick in and do it mandatorily. And in that case, there are certain specific rules you need to follow. It has to be done by the employer, not the employees. You need to document things. And you need to do it for at least 14 days from the time of an exposure in the workplace. Next paragraph. So the most recent guidance that has been issued, I mentioned this before, Pennsylvania has basically taken all the guidance and kind of culled it together. And in the bold letters there, that's exactly what the guidance is called. You'll see that we have the link to it at the bottom. It was issued very recently on May 4th. It incorporates and references all of the relevant other state orders that we discussed. It's got links to it. It provides updated guidance. It addresses the regional and industry-specific approach to reopening businesses, the red, yellow, and green phases. And I have a copy printed out here. It's a 7-page document. It's pretty user-friendly and easy to read. It's broken up into usable categories, it's useful for you to have. And as I said, with that, there is also the notice, the COVID-19 safety procedures for businesses. We gave you the link to that. Make sure you have that as well. But these are the state-specific guidance that you should have at your fingertips. And again, really, in my view, that it's the most important thing that you need to have in place. So that concludes the presentation. I'm sorry I went a little bit longer than I expected. I hope to have more time to go over questions, although I certainly can stay and would be available to answer questions afterwards. Right now, there are some questions here. When we return, we have mostly 1099 service providers. What are we required to provide, and what policies are defined for independent contractors versus an employee? Or is there a difference under these orders? Well, that is a very good question, and quite honestly, off the top of my head, I do not have a direct answer for that. What I would say is, and I can provide, if you want to get your information either to me directly or to the chamber, I will get you an answer. And if others are interested, again, the chamber could publish this. I will get you a specific answer to this. What I will say is, remember that the guidance is, if you have people in your facility, certain things need to be followed anyway. So, I would say if you have 1099 workers, let's call them, independent contractors who are actually in your workplace, really, I'm going to say that for a variety of reasons, you should be following this guidance, even if it's not mandatory, but we will get you that answer. For example, the personal hygiene, the hand washing, the masks. I mean, I think the last thing that you want to do, even from a PR perspective and simply from a safety standpoint, is you have people come back that you can technically say, well, they're not employees, they're 1099 workers. And if you have an outbreak in your facility that kind of spreads as a result of that, and maybe gets partially out in the community to a certain degree, creates a hotspot, that's going to be kind of bad news for your business, and it's going to internally and externally, that's going to be a big problem. So again, I will look into that a little bit more, but that's kind of a preliminary answer. Is there any guidance from the state or CDC about what constitutes a mask suitable for the workplace? Yes, there is. And, I would literally go and you can Google that and Google that question. What I would say is, Google the CDC, that question. OSHA has information on that, and so does Pennsylvania. And if you go to that question and answer format about the question and answer guidance about that detailed order that I told you about, there will be answers about this as well. Basically, homemade masks are suitable, and OSHA and the CDC will provide a little bit more guidance in terms of, OSHA will provide guidance literally about, wearing, it's more designed for respirators, but like wearing a mask when you have like a beard, for example, like what's the best way or what's the best mask to address that. Now, again, keep in mind that the mask wearing that we're talking about, first of all, you have to be informed. The masks are really not to protect the employee. They're to protect other people from the employee. So, if you're wearing a mask, you're protecting other people. But the idea is if everybody is wearing a mask, then no pun intended, the masses are going to be more protected, whether that's out in the public or whether that's in the workplace. So, if you're talking about like a medical provider, would never want to wear a mask that's like one of these handkerchief masks that you see people wearing. Because if they're working with sick people, the virus will be able to penetrate that mask and get into openings or even through the fabric. However, if you're wearing one of those masks as a worker, you're still going to have some degree of protection of protecting other people. For example, you sneeze or you cough. It's going to at least reduce anything that could be expelled into the air to some degree. So, we're not living in a perfect world in this regard, but that was a longer answer to, the direct answer is you can go and seek the guidance. It is perfectly fine to meet your obligations to tell employees they have to make their own masks. You may want to be involved if employees say, well, I don't have the materials. But again, there's a lot of guidance out there, and even through Pennsylvania, that will talk about what's suitable for a face covering. And remember as well that right now, none of these government agencies are necessarily in a bulldog enforcement mode. I mean, I don't think anybody should be skirting these issues because, again, there could be a community and your workforce and your families can be put in danger. On the other hand, if your employees are not wearing masks, or it takes you a little bit of time to get up to speed, or, there's some questions, and nobody's going to be knocking on your door and hauling anybody out of the building. Having said that, keep in mind that, if an employee has a concern because people aren't following the rules, they may call somebody and make a complaint, and somebody may come and look at that. I think the idea right now is the government agencies are looking for good faith compliance, and I think they're trying to help people achieve compliance rather than punish people right now, and businesses, at least if the businesses are acting in good faith. Another question, if an employee is exposed to COVID and has to stay away from work, do we still pay them, even if they have no sick time? Well, the short answer is, let's put aside the CCFRA for a moment. There is no general obligation to pay an employee if they are out sick and they have no sick time. Now, having said that, if they are out specifically due to COVID-19, we talked about the FFCRA benefits. And one of them is that 2-week, essentially, 80 hours for a full-time employee, paid emergency sick leave. Two of the prongs of that paid sick leave are if you're having symptoms, if an employee is having symptoms of COVID-19 and is seeking medical advice. So if I go home with a fever and I'm not working for 3 days because I had a fever, and I'm getting in touch with my doctor to have a telemedicine appointment so that he can try to diagnose me or tell me what I need to do, then under the FFCRA, you do have to pay me for that time out, for that specific benefit. That's the diagnosis phase. Now, if the doctor comes back and says, I am recommending that you quarantine for 14 days because I believe there is enough to diagnose you with COVID-19, and that doesn't necessarily have to be as a result of a direct test, then again, you're going to move into, that's another reason. We're out of the diagnosis phase, but now we have a direct recommendation of a medical provider that the person needs to quarantine as a result of COVID-19. That would also be a qualifying reason under the FFCRA to pay the benefits. Now, we've had two independent but related reasons as to why the person would be entitled to benefits, but that leave is only going to be capped, regardless of the multiple reasons. It's going to be capped at 80 hours for a full-time employee, basically 2 weeks. And you, the employer, you would pay them, but you would have to, you would be able to get the tax credit to fund that. I have another question. As for the 24 to 48 hour wait time before cleaning after a COVID-19 positive, a professional cleaning company can still address the situation to reduce downtime and risk to the company worker, correct? And I believe that's correct. Again, there's going to be flexibility here. These orders are designed to get a balance between allowing flexibility for employers to operate and to protecting workers in the public. So, again, the rule, first of all, is that if possible, an employer should, quarantine, segregate the area and wait 24 to 48 hours. There may be reasons why it's not possible. And I think as well, if you're bringing in a professional cleaning company that is going to have more tools at its disposal, such as PPE itself for the workers, and they're going to be able to do some more detailed and specialty cleaning, then I think that would be perfectly permitted. But again, you're going to want to review those situations on an individualized case-by-case basis. Another question is, what is your advice for employees that do not want to return to work full-time or not at all because they are collecting unemployment even if you have full-time hours? Well, this is obviously very difficult. I know that, the compassionate part of us kind of says, well, gee, I can understand if somebody is well, I guess it depends. I guess it somewhat depends on the attitude. I mean, if an employee just says, well, hey, I'm not scared to come back, but heck, I don't want to come back because I'm doing better on unemployment. Well, I think the answer there is pretty easy. I mean, unless you just want to be a very benevolent business owner and say, hey, whatever my employees want to do, the heck with it. I mean, I don't really need to worry. I want them to control what happens with my business requirements. It's I think it's your decision. I mean, I think as a general rule, if you have if you have employees if you have a need and want to reopen, and you have staffing needs and full-time work, and you're going to put somebody in that slot, unless an employee has a good reason for not coming back, and I would put that in the category of, a health reason, some type of unique family situation, or obviously if they qualify for a legally protected leave under the FMLA or for one of these reasons under the FFCRA, in my rule of thumb would be, you make a clear offer of that employee to return to work and give them a return date. And, if the employee is unwilling to return, you certainly have a perfect right to provide that information to unemployment, and it's potentially going to cut off their benefits. Otherwise you run the risk of opening the floodgates. I mean, the minute you do that for one employee, then what does that prevent from every other employee from saying, yeah, well, we're not coming back either. We want to get paid for not doing the work. And so I think you need to be very careful about that. Another question, our business is open. We have a temp sheet that asks symptoms questions, but are not requiring to have our employees take their temp, are then recording it. They can take their temp, but not requiring them to write it down. We did not want to have their employees potentially seeing other employees' temps. Can you please give us your thoughts on this? That's absolutely fine. Again, right now, the rules are a little bit more relaxed. You can have the employees, unless there's an exposure in the workplace. If there's an exposure in the workplace, then you must take the temperatures. And it is perfectly fine if the question that employees answer and that they're writing down in the temperature sheet is basically, do you have a temperature that's below that mark of, I think it's 100.4. And you can also put a system in place, obviously, that you can say, if you do have a temperature that's above 100.4, then you need to notify X. They don't necessarily need to write it down themselves or in a place where anybody else can see it. They contact an appropriate person that's either a medical person on staff or HR person, somebody that would be entitled to deal with that information, and then you can internally document it where no one else can see it. You can put a procedure in place that would address that. And I think we're all out of questions. Again, I want to thank everybody for spending your time this morning, and I wish everyone well, personally and professionally, business-wise, as we continue down this uncharted path.
Okay, well, Joe, thank you very much on behalf of the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce. This was a great webinar, and it will be posted later in the day to scrantonchamber.com/events and important on the important resources page. Upcoming webinars that we have, please check us out at scrantonchamber.com/events. We just got word that we are booked for Wednesday, May 20th at 9 o'clock for business disruption insurance. So please check our website to register. That should be up today. Thank you all and have a great day.